When Angela was in her youth, she experienced a tragic accident that disrupted all her plans. She had anticipated receiving support from her husband Michael, but his actions towards his wife were utterly repulsive. Angela and Susan had been lifelong friends, having studied and grown up together in the same neighborhood. Inseparable, they graduated from the same college and worked for the same company. On a particular day after work, the two friends decided to unwind at a nightclub. Engaging in conversations about their recent failed relationships while sipping cocktails, their evening took an unexpected turn when a man approached them with a bouquet of roses, presenting them to Angela. Initially bewildered, Angela and the man ended up engrossed in conversation throughout the night. Her relationship with the man, Michael, progressed rapidly, and within just 6 months, he proposed marriage to her. Though taken by surprise, Angela found herself fond of him due to his attractive appearance and charming demeanor. Additionally, Michael exhibited friendliness and established a good rapport with Angela's family. After careful consideration, listening to her friend's advice, Angela agreed to marry him, resulting in a wedding attended by only a few of Michael's friends, his mother, and Angela's best friend Susan. A year later, they welcomed a beautiful daughter into their lives, bringing them even closer. Time passed, and Angela reveled in what she considered a perfect life. She had a beloved daughter, a wonderful husband, an excellent job with promising prospects, and numerous life plans. Little did she imagine that everything would be shattered in an instant. On a day when Angela was rushing to get home, a simple act driven by a multitude of tasks, her plans were thwarted by heavy rain preventing her car from starting. Left with no alternative, she decided to walk home, as it was only a few streets away. However, her new high heels proved unsuitable for the wet sidewalks, causing her to experience a devastating fall, rendering her unconscious as her head hit the pavement. Fortunately, some passersby came to her aid and stopped to help. Angela gradually regained consciousness in the intensive care unit, having undergone 2 surgeries and enduring an extended period of therapy in the hospital for 3 months before finally being discharged. Angela found herself bedridden, incapable of sitting up unassisted. A few days after returning home, she received the heart-wrenching news that she would spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. At the time, her daughter was not even 3 years old. Thankfully, her husband brought their daughter to visit Angela daily, often accompanied by her best friend Susan. However, as the paralyzed woman observed their interactions, she couldn't help but notice the exchanged glances between her friend and husband, which grew increasingly suspicious. Susan would frequently head to the kitchen, with Michael following closely, their behavior becoming overtly dubious. Angela, though paralyzed, could see it all, despite her reluctance to believe it. In tears, Angela eventually mustered the courage to ask Susan to cease coming to her house. However, her friend callously laughed in her face. As months passed, Angela's condition improved slightly, but Susan continued to visit almost every day, and she and Michael would occasionally enter Angela's room during the night. Michael would then accompany Susan home, with their affair no longer concealed. Michael hired a private nurse for Angela, allowing him to spend most of his time at Susan's house. As time went on, he visited their home less frequently, and eventually, the day came when he heartlessly announced his intention to leave forever. To make matters worse, he delivered his cruel message at their farewell, taunting his wife by asserting that he had a whole life ahead of him, unlike Angela, who was destined to be confined to a wheelchair, awaiting her demise. These words shook Angela to her core, pushing her to contemplate whether she should continue living. In those dark moments, her daughter became her saving grace, preventing her from succumbing to despair and considering drastic actions. Soon after, Michael filed for divorce, and Angela, consumed by depression and exhaustion, quietly agreed and signed all the necessary papers, solely desiring to eliminate him from her life. However, the presence of her mother-in-law made this endeavor challenging. Whenever her granddaughter was brought over, she couldn't help but slip hints about how well Michael and Susan were doing, insinuating that they were an ideal couple. On the first anniversary of the tragic incident that shattered her life, Angela found herself overwhelmed with grief, spending the entire day in tears as she reminisced about the joy she once possessed and the perfection of her former life. Following her psychologist's advice, she attempted to alleviate her sorrow by taking deep breaths, although she held minimal belief in such psychological techniques, complying with the recommendations without expecting much. Little did she know that fate had something unexpected in store for her. Determined to overcome her despair, Angela freshened up, dressed herself, and decided to take a morning stroll in the park before making a stop at the supermarket. Her excursions outside were rare, as she typically relied on home deliveries for all her needs. She hoped that this change of scenery would bring about a positive shift. While browsing the fruit section of the supermarket, Angela accidentally bumped into a man whose tall stature seemed vaguely familiar. Upon closer inspection, she recognized his worn face, framed by wisps of blonde hair. It was Scott, her former boss. Scott had always been known for his excessive strictness and high demands of the staff, and he had also been the subject of jokes shared between Angela and Susan. They often poked fun at the fact that he lived with his mother and had seemingly not dated anyone in years. Feeling a sense of embarrassment from those memories, Angela was taken aback when Scott, sensing her unease, stopped and inquired if there was anything he could do to assist her. The man looked earnestly into Angela's eyes, and there was sincerity and warmth in his voice. She whispered that she was going shopping. Her former boss immediately offered to help her, and Angela nodded blankly. She didn't understand why she responded like that, perhaps out of a subconscious desire for someone to talk to. Scott bought everything she needed and helped her take it all home. Before Angela had a chance to notice, he had sorted the food and begun to prepare dinner. Obviously, he enjoyed cooking. He did it with immense passion and joy on his face, as if it were his favorite hobby. The dinner was incredibly delicious. At the end of dinner, Scott took Angela's hand, looked intently into her eyes, and told her everything would be all right. Before the kind man went home, he said he would come to see her the next day. The next day, Scott brought bags full of fruit and flowers. Angela had forgotten the last time she had pampered herself with such things. After dinner, they talked for a while, and she learned that Scott's mother had died about a year ago. She had been very ill for 5 years, and for all that time, her son had taken care of her. Angela felt so ashamed of all her previous words and jokes about her former boss. Weeks passed, and Scott began to come every day to visit his new friend. Angela suddenly started to care about her appearance, combing her hair more carefully, spending more time choosing clothes, and even buying new makeup. She couldn't believe she'd become attached to this man so easily and quickly. He constantly gave her flowers and helped her at home with various chores. While walking together in the park, Scott liked to talk about his life. It turned out that he had a fiancée whom he dated for a long time, and they were even going to get married. But suddenly, her mother became seriously ill, and he decided to move in with his fiancée to help care for her sick mother. But this was too much for his fiancée. She decided she wanted a different life and left him for another man. 10 days before the wedding, after 2 months of seeing Scott, Angela could no longer imagine life without him. Then one morning while working out, she dropped a weight on her toes, and to her surprise, she felt a slight pain. The paralyzed woman could hardly wait to share the news with Scott, because it was the first time in a long time that she had felt anything in her legs. Yet when Scott came home, she noted a severe look on his face, and Angela waited to see what was the matter. He said they needed to have a crucial conversation urgently. Angela was frozen, imagining he had probably come to finish everything and say goodbye to her. However, Scott suddenly took a box out of his pocket, revealing a sparkling ring, and asked for her hand in marriage. He spoke beautiful words, admitting that he liked Angela as soon as she started working for him. But with everything that was going on in his life, he simply did not have time to have a relationship. Besides, she was married. The woman had not expected such a turn of events and could not move for a moment. Then, coming out of her shock, the surprised woman shouted yes, and then she said she also had good news for Scott, telling him about the pain she had felt in her toe, which meant she was slowly recovering and might be able to walk one day. Shortly after, they had a beautiful wedding, sparing no expense to have a big party. Angela had fallen in love with her new husband like never before, and she understood the true meaning of a quality relationship. Scott helped her without expecting or demanding anything in return. He was also happier than he had ever been. They found a clinic that treated paralysis with innovative physical therapy techniques. It was 6 months of hard work and painful procedures, and Angela could barely stand the strain of the clinic. But Scott was always there to support her, and thinking about her daughter motivated her to push harder. Angela desperately wanted to get back on her feet, especially now, with so much hope for a better future. Finally, the long-awaited day came when she stood up on her own. Angela walked down the narrow hallway, leaning on her cane. It was painful, but she was happy to feel the ground's firmness again. Wanting to surprise her daughter, she asked Scott to drive her to the high school. When she saw her mother standing on her own beside the car, the girl broke free from her grandmother's arms and ran towards her mom. They hugged each other tightly, tears of joy rolling down their faces. 2 years have now passed and much has changed. First, Scott quit his job and opened a small family restaurant, fulfilling his childhood dream. Then one day, Angela was cleaning the house when the doorbell rang. She opened the door, and to her surprise, there was her ex-husband, who looked quite miserable. The man smelled of booze and started complaining about life. He said that Susan had kicked him out of the house and that he had to live with his mother, who constantly harassed him as he began apologizing, asking her to come back, reminding her that they had a daughter together. Angela pointed out that she was already married and had no interest in him whatsoever. She told Michael that she didn't want to hear any more of his nonsense, and she was happy with a faithful and reliable man, and that her ex-husband should never show his face to her again. Then, as she closed the door behind him, she remembered his hurtful words when he had left her and reflected on how life takes such unexpected turns. That same night, Angela told her husband and daughter the good news that their family would soon have a new baby.